The word sliced through the scorching afternoon heat, radiating off the tarmac like a knife. Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres, his jaw clenched tight with barely restrained frustration, wasn't looking at Colonel James Mitchell. He was staring at the elderly man standing quietly beside him. The old man, William Hayes, appeared completely unbothered by the oppressive desert heat, the thunderous roar of F-16 screaming overhead, or the contempt dripping from the young officer's voice. He was ancient by military standards, dressed in oil-stained coveralls that had faded from navy blue to a washed-out gray decades ago. His hands, thick, weathered, marked with scars that told stories of countless repairs, hung relaxed at his sides. His focus was entirely on the silent machine before them, an AH-64 Apache helicopter, the most lethal aerial weapon system in the American arsenal, now rendered completely useless by a ghost hiding somewhere in its complex guts. Colonel Mitchell let out a long, measured breath, the sound barely audible over the whine of a C-17 taxiing on the distant runway. "Chief," he said carefully, "this is Mr. Hayes. He's here to take a look." Torres let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Take a look, sir. With all due respect, my team has been crawling over this bird for 96 hours straight. We've run every single diagnostic protocol in the manual. We've replaced the FADEC twice, borescoped both turbines, pressure-tested every fuel line in the system, and swapped out 17 different sensors. The digital readouts are completely clean. According to every computer on this base, there's nothing wrong with this aircraft. Yet the starboard T-700 engine shuts down hard at exactly 62% power every single time. We've got engineers from Boeing on satellite uplink, and General Electric has their top turbine specialist flying in tomorrow morning." He gestured dismissively at William. "What we don't need, sir, is vintage help." William's pale blue eyes never left the Apache. He was somewhere north of 75 years old, his face deeply lined from a lifetime spent under unforgiving suns and crushing pressure. Those eyes, though clouded slightly with age, possessed an intensity that was almost unsettling. He wasn't just looking at the helicopter, he was reading it, studying the way it sat on its landing gear, the subtle variation in how the composite panels reflected sunlight, the almost imperceptible tilt of its weapon pylons. He was listening to its silence the way a doctor listens to a heartbeat. A small group of younger mechanics had gathered at a respectful distance, drawn by the strange confrontation. These were the absolute best of the best, digital natives who could interface with a $100 million weapon system through ruggedized tablets, technicians who understood turboshaft engines at the molecular level. This enigmatic failure had broken them. Their confidence had eroded with every failed startup test, every clean diagnostic that should have revealed the problem but didn't. Now they watched this bizarre scene unfold, a mixture of curiosity and the same scorn their commanding officer was displaying so openly. Whispered questions rippled through the group. Who was this old guy? Some retired mechanic the colonel knew from way back? A desperate good luck charm? This was embarrassing. "Let him look, Chief," Colonel Mitchell said, and now his voice carried that hard edge of command that Michael Torres knew better than to challenge. "That's an order." Torres's jaw muscles flexed. He stepped back with an exaggerated gesture of theatrical surrender. "Fine, the flight line is yours, Mr. Hayes. Just please don't touch anything critical. This is an extremely sensitive weapon system." William gave the colonel a single, slow nod of acknowledgement and began to move. He didn't head toward the open engine cowling where Torres's team had spent the last 4 days elbow-deep in machinery. Instead, he started at the tail rotor, his gnarled fingers gently, almost reverently, tracing the leading edge of the stabilator. He moved with a shuffling, economical grace, a man completely at home in this world of jet fuel vapor and hydraulic fluid. Every movement was deliberate. His attention was absolute. He circled the Apache slowly, his head tilted slightly, as if listening for a voice only he could hear. The young mechanics exchanged knowing smirks. He looked like a rancher checking a horse for lameness, not a technician diagnosing a catastrophic turbine failure in a $52 million attack helicopter. He finally stopped at the starboard side, positioning himself directly beneath the engine that had tormented Fort Rucker's finest for 4 solid days. He didn't immediately look up at the impossible tangle of fuel lines, wiring harnesses, and sensor arrays. Instead, he slowly lowered himself to one knee, his old joints popping in protest, and peered underneath at the precise point where the engine housing mated to the airframe. "Flashlight," he said quietly, his voice gravelly and unused to giving orders. A young specialist named Ethan Cooper, eager to break the uncomfortable tension, quickly grabbed a high-powered LED flashlight and handed it over. Torres rolled his eyes dramatically, crossing his arms across his chest. "Sir, we've had military-grade thermal imaging cameras, fiber optic scopes, and ultrasonic testing equipment all over that section. I can personally guarantee that a flashlight isn't going to reveal anything we missed with $200,000 worth of diagnostic gear." William ignored him completely. He took the flashlight and began playing its bright beam slowly across the underside of the aircraft. But he wasn't just looking. He was observing how the light behaved, how it reflected off different surfaces, how it caught the edges of rivets and panel seams and revealed the subtle topology of the machine. He reached up and laid one weathered hand flat against the cool metal skin of the helicopter, closing his eyes completely. The mechanic saw an old man touching an airplane like it was a fortune-teller's crystal ball. Colonel Mitchell saw something entirely different. A master craftsman communing with a machine on a level that couldn't be taught in any school. He had heard whispers about William Hayes, old stories from Vietnam era, veterans about a man they called the miracle mechanic, a crew chief who could diagnose a cracked turbine blade by laying his hand on an engine cowling, who could feel stress fractures through 3 inches of steel. Mitchell had made the call to bring William here as an absolute last resort, a desperate prayer to a forgotten god of aviation maintenance. After nearly 2 full minutes of this silent, mysterious communion, William opened his eyes. He pushed himself slowly back to his feet with a soft grunt. He reached into the deep pocket of his coveralls and pulled out a small, worn leather tool roll darkened with decades of oil and sweat. He untied it with practiced, careful fingers. Inside, nestled in soft cloth that had once been white, were not the gleaming, precision machine tools of a modern aviation mechanic, but a collection of strange, oddly shaped hand-forged instruments, their surfaces polished to a mirror shine by decades of constant use. Torres's face flushed red. What in God's name are those? William selected one carefully. It was a long, slender probe of hand-worked steel, bent at a precise but unnatural angle, its tip ground down to an impossibly fine point. It looked more like a medieval lockpick than a tool meant for an Apache. "Absolutely not." Torres stepped forward, his voice rising. "You are not putting that thing anywhere near my engine." "That's it, sir." He turned to Colonel Mitchell. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but this is a complete waste of everyone's time. This man is going to damage a multi-million-dollar aircraft with homemade tools." As William stood there holding the strange instrument, the harsh desert sunlight glinting off its hand-polished surface, the world around him seemed to slow and blur. The roar of distant jets faded away, replaced by the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of Huey rotor blades cutting through humid air. The dry heat became oppressive jungle moisture. The smell of jet fuel mixed suddenly with the metallic stench of blood and the acrid bite of gunpowder. He wasn't standing on a pristine American airbase. He was in a muddy clearing in the A-Shaw Valley, 1971. Rain hammering down so hard he could barely see 10 feet. A young pilot, couldn't have been more than 23, was screaming over the storm, "We gotta go now! They're coming through the trees!" The Huey's engine was dying, its compressor damaged by shrapnel from a mortar round. There were no spare parts, no proper tools, just the burning wreckage of a downed cobra nearby and a dozen wounded men who would die if that bird didn't fly. In his mind's eye, he saw his younger self, Specialist William Hayes, 26 years old, covered in mud and blood that wasn't his own, pulling a piece of leaf spring from the cobra's wreckage. He'd heated it over a makeshift fire, hammered it against a rock with a chunk of steel, shaped it, ground it, quenched it, the very tool he now held in his hand. He'd used it to bypass the damaged compressor linkage, a repair that every manual said was impossible in field conditions. The Huey had lifted off with enemy rounds snapping through the air around them, carrying 12 dying men to safety. The tool wasn't just metal. It was a memory forged in fire. It was a promise he'd made to those 12 men, "I will never let you down." Back in the present, on the hot tarmac, Specialist Ethan Cooper felt a knot of anger forming in his chest. He'd been watching the way Chief Torres was treating the old man, the dismissiveness, the open disrespect, the theatrical contempt. But he'd also seen something in Mr. Hayes's eyes. It was a look of absolute, unshakable certainty. Cooper had seen that look exactly once before, in the eyes of an EOD tech about to cut the wire on a complex IED in Afghanistan. It was the look of someone who saw a completely different reality than everyone else. A hidden world of cause and effect that was invisible to untrained eyes. Torres took another aggressive step toward William, his hand raised as if to physically block him. "Mr. Hayes, I'm ordering you to step away from this aircraft. You're a civilian, and you're interfering with critical military property. Do not make me call security forces to have you removed from this flight line." The threat of arrest hung in the still, hot air like a thundercloud. The other mechanics shifted uncomfortably, exchanging nervous glances. This had escalated from an interesting curiosity to a genuine crisis. Cooper knew he had absolutely no authority to challenge a chief warrant officer. It would destroy his career before it even started. But he also couldn't just stand there and watch this happen. He subtly pulled out his phone, keeping it low and out of Torres's peripheral vision. His fingers flew across the screen, sending an urgent text message to the colonel's aide, Captain Rodriguez, who he knew was monitoring the situation from the command center. The message was brief and desperate. "Sir C.W. Torres, about to have Mr. Hayes arrested by SF, threatening civilian detention. Colonel needs to get down here right now. I think the old man actually found something. I really think he knows what's wrong." He hit send. The message flew across the base's encrypted network, a digital act of rebellion. In that moment, Specialist Cooper and everyone watching this video knew something that Chief Torres and his entire team did not. Help was already on the way. The balance of power was about to shift dramatically, and the quiet dignity of this unassuming hero was about to be vindicated in the most spectacular way imaginable. Inside the climate-controlled quiet of the base command center, Colonel James Mitchell was reviewing maintenance reports when his aide, Captain Rodriguez, burst through the door without knocking. "Phone in hand, sir?" Rodriguez's voice was urgent. Text from Specialist Cooper on the flight line. Mitchell snatched the phone and read the message. His expression went from concern to absolutely furious in the span of 2 seconds. "Get me base archives," he snapped. "Right now." Rodriguez already had his own phone out, dialing before the colonel finished speaking. A moment later, a professional voice answered. "Archives, Staff Sergeant Emma Williams speaking. Williams, this is Colonel Mitchell. I need an immediate service record lookup. Hayes. William Hayes. He would have served from approximately 1969 to 1982, aviation maintenance specialty." There was rapid keyboard clicking on the other end. "One moment, sir." "Okay, I've got it." "William Hayes? Oh my God, sir. This file is flagged as historically significant. It's extensive." "Read me the medals and commendations," Mitchell ordered, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. "Yes, sir." "Medal of Honor," Mitchell stopped pacing. "Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor Device, 23 Air Medals, Bronze Star with Valor Device, 3 Purple Hearts." "Sir, the commendation list is 6 pages long." Colonel Mitchell felt his blood run cold. "What about the Medal of Honor citation?" "Read it." "Yes, sir." It reads, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. On 23 April 1971, Specialist William Hayes volunteered to remain with a downed medevac helicopter deep in enemy-controlled territory. Under continuous heavy fire and repeated mortar attacks, Specialist Hayes Using improvised tools created from battlefield wreckage, performed emergency repairs to catastrophically damaged aircraft, enabling the evacuation of 14 critically wounded American soldiers and 2 aircrew. Despite being wounded twice, Specialist Hayes refused evacuation until all personnel were safely extracted. His extraordinary heroism and selfless devotion to duty are in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. Mitchell felt his hands trembling. He'd known Hayes was good, he'd heard old stories, but this was a living legend. This was a man who'd been personally decorated by the President of the United States. "There's a note here attached to the file, sir," Williams added, from General David Richardson. It says, "Bill Hayes is the finest aircraft mechanic in American military history. If this man ever needs anything at all, you give it to him without question. He saved my life and the lives of my entire crew. I owe him everything." Colonel Mitchell's jaw clenched. General David Richardson, commander of the Army Aviation Center of Excellence, the 4-star general currently making an inspection visit to Fort Rucker, a 4-star general who was on base right now. "Get me General Richardson's aide," Mitchell commanded. "Tell them it's a code-red emergency involving a Medal of Honor recipient. And get my vehicle. We're going to the flight line." Back on the tarmac, the confrontation had reached its breaking point. William, still holding his hand-forged tool with absolute calm, was pointing with its delicate tip toward a spot deep within the engine's interior, buried under a maze of wiring and hydraulic lines. "There," William said, his voice quiet but certain. "The bleed air valve actuator. There's a stress fracture in the mounting bracket." Torres's face went from red to purple. "That's completely impossible. We ultrasonically tested that entire assembly. The computer analysis showed 0 defects. There is no fracture." He stepped directly in front of William, blocking his access to the aircraft. "That's it. I've had enough of this circus." He turned to one of the younger mechanics. "Specialist Davis, go get security forces. Tell them we have an unauthorized civilian interfering with military equipment." Davis froze, looking desperately from the furious chief warrant officer to the impossibly calm old man, then to Specialist Cooper, who was shaking his head frantically. But before anyone could move, a new sound cut through the tension, the squeal of tires on asphalt. A black SUV, a government Suburban with official plates and flags, was driving at high speed directly onto the active flight line, violating about 15 different safety regulations. It screeched to a halt just yards from the Apache. Every mechanic instantly snapped to attention. Torres spun around, his mouth falling open at the breach of protocol. Colonel Mitchell emerged from the passenger seat, his face like a thunderstorm, but it was the man who stepped out of the rear seat that caused every jaw on the flight line to drop. He was in his early 70s, but he moved with the coiled energy of a much younger man. He wore an immaculate Class A uniform, and on his shoulders gleamed 4 silver stars. General David Richardson, commander of the Army Aviation Center of Excellence. One of the most powerful officers in the United States Army, the sight of a 4-star general appearing unannounced on an active maintenance flight line was so utterly unprecedented that it felt like witnessing a lightning strike. The entire world seemed to stop. The wind died. The distant sounds of the base faded into absolute silence. Torres's anger evaporated instantly, replaced by pure ice-cold terror. He snapped the sharpest salute of his entire life, his hand trembling. "General, sir, I was not informed." General Richardson didn't even glance at him. He walked with absolute purpose right past the saluting chief warrant officer, past the state-of-the-art Apache helicopter, past the assembled team of expert technicians, and stopped directly in front of William Hayes. The entire flight line held its collective breath. The 4-star general, a man who commanded thousands of soldiers, who advised the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who had the President's direct phone number, came to attention, clicked his heels together with precision, and delivered the sharpest, most respectful salute Torres had ever witnessed in 15 years of military service. It was a salute of profound reverence, the kind of gesture a private gives to a general. Though William Hayes wore no rank or uniform. "Bill," the general said, his voice thick with emotion. "My God, it's really you." William slowly lowered his tool. A flicker of recognition crossed his weathered face. He gave a small, slight smile. "David, you got old." A choked, emotional laugh escaped the general. He dropped his salute and turned to face the absolutely stunned mechanics gathered around them. His voice, when he spoke, boomed across the tarmac, each word a hammer blow of truth. "Gentlemen and ladies, you are standing in the presence of a living legend. This is William Hayes. 52 years ago, I was a 22-year-old warrant officer. My Huey was shot down in the Aah Valley. We were surrounded, taking heavy fire, with multiple critically wounded on board. Nobody could reach us. Command had written us off. But Bill Hayes, this man right here, he came anyway. He landed his medevac bird in a hot LZ that was completely overrun under a hail of bullets and mortars that should have killed him a dozen times over." The general's voice cracked slightly with emotion. Our bird was destroyed. The engine was shredded by shrapnel. It was unflyable. That was the professional assessment. But Bill stayed with us for 6 hours. While we held off the enemy, he built tools from wreckage and performed repairs that every technical manual said were impossible. He put that dead bird back in the air, and he got all 14 of us out alive. He was wounded twice and refused medical evacuation until every single one of us was safe. He turned to Colonel Mitchell. "Colonel, read his citation. I want everyone here to understand exactly who they're dealing with." Mitchell pulled out his phone with steady hands and read the Medal of Honor citation in a clear, strong voice. He read about the impossible repair under continuous fire, about the quiet heroism that had never sought recognition, about a mechanic who had become a warrior to save American lives. As he read, the smirks on the faces of the young mechanics disappeared completely, replaced by expressions of pure awe mixed with shame. They weren't looking at some crazy old man anymore. They were looking at a giant walking among them. When Mitchell finished reading, a profound, heavy silence settled over the group like snow. General Richardson's gaze, now cold and hard as winter steel, fell upon Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The quiet menace in his tone was more terrifying than any shout could ever be. "Chief Torres," he began, his words measured and deliberate, "you have access to millions of dollars of diagnostic equipment. You have computers that can measure engine tolerances down to microscopic levels. You have satellite uplinks to the finest aerospace engineers in the world. But all of that equipment can't teach you wisdom. None of it can teach you humility. And none of it can teach you respect." He gestured toward William. "This man's hands have forgotten more about keeping aircraft flying and keeping soldiers alive than you will learn in your entire career. Your diagnostics told you nothing was wrong." He listened to the silence, and it told him everything. "You failed because you trusted only the machines. He succeeded because he understands them." The public rebuke was devastating, delivered in front of Torres's entire team. The chief warrant officer's face, once flushed with anger, was now pale with shame and humiliation. He stared at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. But then William Hayes, the object of all this veneration, took a small step forward. He looked at the humiliated young officer, and his voice, when it came, carried no triumph, only gentle instruction. "It's not your fault, son," William said, and the genuine kindness in his tone was perhaps the most surprising thing anyone had heard all day. "The machines have gotten loud. The computers are loud. You were trained to listen to all that noise. But the aircraft, she always whispers the truth. You just have to get quiet enough to hear it." He held up his hand-forged tool, the one created in the crucible of war. "Your scopes and sensors can't see this particular fracture because it's a dynamic stress failure. It only opens when the actuator is under the very specific load of a 62% power setting under operational temperature. When the engine is cool and static, the crack closes completely. Your diagnostics look for problems that exist in a steady state. I was listening for something that only happens in a moment of transition, the exact moment when it breaks." As he spoke, another memory surfaced, sharp and vivid. Not the memory of making the tool, but of using it. His younger self, covered in mud in that jungle clearing, pressing the tool's tip against the damaged Huey's compressor housing. He wasn't looking with his eyes, his entire hand. His arm, his body had become a sensor, feeling the subtle wrong vibration, the tiny discordant tremor that told him exactly where the metal was failing. The tool wasn't just a piece of steel, it was an extension of his own senses, a bridge between man and machine forged from desperate necessity and hard-won wisdom. He looked directly at Torres with those pale, knowing eyes. "You don't find a problem like this with computers, son. You find it with your hands and your heart." In the immediate aftermath, everything moved with new purpose and profound respect. Following William's precise instructions, a maintenance crew, now including a silent and humbled Chief Torres, carefully removed the indicated bleed air valve actuator assembly. In the bright lights of the maintenance bay, under high-powered magnification, they found it, a hairline stress fracture in the mounting bracket, no thicker than a human hair, invisible to the naked eye and too dynamic to show up on static diagnostic tests. It was exactly where William had said it would be. The part was replaced. The Apache's engine cowlings were carefully sealed. With General Richardson, Colonel Mitchell, and what seemed like half the base watching, the pilot initiated the startup sequence. The starboard engine spooled up smoothly, whining past 62%, then 70%, then 80%, until it settled into a perfect stable, thunderous roar that rattled everyone's chest. The ghost in the machine had been exorcised. General Richardson turned to Colonel Mitchell, his voice carrying command authority. "Colonel, I want a new training directive developed immediately. Every aviation maintenance crew in this command will receive instruction in advanced tactile diagnostics and intuitive troubleshooting. And," he placed a hand on William's shoulder, "if Mr. Hayes will accept, I want him as the lead instructor. Full DoD contractor position, whatever salary he wants." William gave a small, humble shrug. "I'll do it for free, General. These kids need to learn, not a chance bill," Richardson said firmly. "You've given enough for free. This time the Army pays you what you're worth." The next day, a formal base-wide commendation was issued, not only honoring William for solving the impossible problem, but officially documenting his legendary service record for a new generation. Chief Warrant Officer Torres was not formally disciplined. His punishment was far more educational. He became the first student enrolled in William's new program. 3 weeks later, the scene was quiet and peaceful. Inside the base's main workshop, far from the noise of the flight line, Chief Michael Torres stood at a workbench, awkwardly trying to use a hand file on a small block of aluminum. His movements were jerky and uncertain. He was attempting to replicate one of the simple hand tools from William's leather roll, and he was failing badly. A shadow fell across the bench. William Hayes stood beside him, holding 2 mugs of coffee. He watched for a long moment without saying anything about their confrontation on the flight line, about the disrespect, about any of it. He simply set down 1 mug in front of Torres and took a sip from his own. Then he reached out and gently adjusted Torres's grip on the file. "Easy now," the old man said quietly. "Don't fight against it. Let the tool do the work. Feel how the metal wants to be cut." Under William's patient guidance, Torres's strokes became smoother, more confident. He was still clumsy, still learning, but for the first time he wasn't just forcing the tool against the metal. He was beginning to listen to it. He was starting to understand. "Mr. Hayes," Torres said quietly, not looking up from his work, "I owe you an apology. What I said out there, how I treated you, there's no excuse for it." William was quiet for a moment, watching the younger man work. "You were doing your job the way you were trained, son. Can't fault a man for that. But now you're learning a new way. That takes courage." Torres finally looked up, meeting the old veteran's eyes. "Why did you agree to teach us? After how I treated you, why help me?" William smiled, and his eyes grew distant for just a moment, seeing faces from long ago. "Because 52 years ago, 14 men went home to their families because somebody taught me how to listen to machines when they whisper. Now it's my turn to pass it on." In the quiet of that workshop, away from the pressure and the noise and the technology, a different kind of repair was taking place. Not of metal or engines, but of pride, of understanding, of the timeless bond between generations of those who serve. 6 months later, Chief Warrant Officer Michael Torres would diagnose a critical failure in a Black Hawk that every computer said was functioning perfectly. He would find it by placing his hand on the transmission housing and feeling a vibration that shouldn't be there. He would fix it using a hand-forged tool he'd made himself under William's guidance. And when his commanding officer asked him how he'd found a problem that had stumped the entire maintenance crew, Torres would smile and say, "An old friend taught me how to listen." William Hayes's story is a powerful reminder that true expertise isn't just learned from screens and manuals. It's earned through fire, forged in crisis, and passed down through the hands and hearts of those who came before us. The greatest technology we possess isn't artificial intelligence or quantum computing. It's the human wisdom gained through sacrifice and service. If you were inspired by this story of quiet valor and timeless wisdom, be sure to smash that like button. Subscribe to Veteran Valor Stories for more incredible true accounts of American heroes. And share this video with someone who understands that some lessons can only be taught by those who've lived them. Because the real miracle wasn't just fixing an engine. It was remembering that behind every machine is a human being, and the greatest tool we have is still the human heart.